What if history had intentionally forgotten one of its most profound chapters? For nearly a century, Egypt, the land of pyramids, the Sphinx, and one of humanity's foundational civilizations, was ruled not by Egyptians, but by African kings from the deep south. These were the Nubian pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, rulers of the Kingdom of Kush. Their names were systematically chiseled from monuments, their achievements buried beneath millennia of neglect, their very existence challenging everything Western scholarship claimed about ancient Africa. They weren't barbarian conquerors who plundered Egypt. Archaeological evidence overwhelmingly suggests they were pious restorers who revitalized it. They didn't merely rule Egypt. They may have understood Egyptian tradition better than many native rulers of their time. This is their complete story, a narrative of political genius, cultural synthesis, and resilient civilization that redefines our understanding of the ancient world. The land of the bow and gold. To comprehend the Kushite pharaohs, we must journey south of Egypt's first cataract at Aswan, where the Nile carves through granite cliffs and golden deserts. This was Nubia, or as scholars increasingly prefer, the Kingdom of Kush. The ancient Egyptians knew this region by two names: Taseti, land of the bow, for its legendary archers whose military prowess echoed throughout the Bronze Age world, and Nub, land of gold, for the precious metal that flowed from its mines into Egyptian treasuries. The geographical distinction is crucial. While Egypt's civilization flourished in the Nile's broad delta and valley, Kush developed in the more challenging environment of what's now northern Sudan, a landscape of deserts, rocky outcrops, and the Great Nile Bend. This environment forged a resilient, adaptable people whose relationship with Egypt would evolve over 3 millennia from trading partner to subject to ruler. Kerma, Africa's early urban revolution. Long before Kush ruled Egypt, it had already established itself as a major civilization. At Kerma, approximately 250 kilometers south of Aswan, archaeological excavations have revealed one of Africa's earliest and most sophisticated urban centers. As early as 2500 BCE, contemporary with Egypt's Old Kingdom pyramid builders, Kerma was a thriving metropolis with distinct architectural traditions, advanced pottery, and metallurgical expertise. The Kerma culture, circa 2500 to 1500 BCE, represents what archaeologists term the Middle Kingdom of Kush. Its capital featured a massive mudbrick temple, known as the Western Defufa, extensive residential quarters, and fortifications. Most strikingly, Kerma's rulers were buried in enormous tumuli, earth mounds, surrounded by hundreds of sacrificial victims and grave goods, suggesting a complex society with strong religious beliefs and social hierarchy. Kerma's material culture was distinctly African yet sophisticated. Their pottery, particularly the fine black-topped red ware, displays exceptional craftsmanship. Their bronze work included weapons, tools, and jewelry. Most significantly, Kerma maintained extensive trade networks connecting sub-Saharan Africa with Egypt and the Mediterranean, dealing in gold, ivory, ebony, incense, and exotic animals. The Egyptian conquest and its paradoxical legacy. Around 1500 BCE, during Egypt's aggressive New Kingdom expansion under pharaohs like Thutmose I and III, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Egypt, seeking direct control over Nubian gold mines and trade routes, conquered Kush and established it as a colonial territory. For the next 4 centuries, Nubian wealth flowed north to finance Egyptian monuments, temples, and military campaigns. This period of Egyptian domination, circa 1500 to 1070 BCE, represents one of history's great ironies. The very subjugation that might have destroyed Kushite culture instead prepared it for future rule over Egypt. During these centuries, several crucial developments occurred. Elite education. Nubian nobility were educated in Egyptian ways, often sent to Egyptian courts or temples. They learned hieroglyphs, studied Egyptian religion, and absorbed administrative practices while maintaining their native languages and cultural identity. Religious syncretism. The Kushites identified their own deities with Egyptian gods. Most importantly, they syncretized their chief god with Ammonius of Thebes, creating Ammonius of Napata, who would become central to Kushite kingship ideology. Military integration. Nubian soldiers, renowned as archers, served prominently in Egyptian armies, gaining first-hand experience of Egyptian military organization and tactics. Infrastructure development. Egyptians built temples and administrative centers in Kush, particularly at Nubia near the sacred mountain Jebel Barkal, inadvertently creating the infrastructure for a future Kushite capital. The relationship was never one way. Egyptian art from this period shows Nubian influences in hairstyles, jewelry, and even royal regalia. The famous Nubian wig became fashionable in Egyptian courts. This cultural exchange, though occurring under unequal political circumstances, created a shared Nile Valley civilization with hybrid characteristics. The collapse of Egyptian power and Kushite resurgence. By 1100 BCE, Egypt's new kingdom was disintegrating. Internal divisions, economic difficulties, and external pressures from the Sea Peoples and Libyan tribes weakened central authority. Around 1070 BCE, Egyptian control over Kush effectively collapsed. The withdrawal wasn't sudden but gradual, as Egyptian officials either departed or assimilated into Kushite society. What emerged from this power vacuum was remarkable. Rather than rejecting Egyptian culture, Kushite rulers embraced it as their inheritance. They had spent centuries as students. Now they would become masters. The stage was set for one of history's most unexpected reversals of fortune. The sacred mountain, Jebel Barkal as spiritual epicenter. At the heart of Kushite resurgence stood Jebel Barkal, a solitary sandstone mesa rising 98 meters above the Nile plain near modern-day Karima, Sudan. To the Kushites, this wasn't just a mountain. It was the southern home of the god Ammonius, the pure mountain, where divinity touched earth. Archaeological evidence suggests the site had been sacred since Kerma times, but under Egyptian influence it developed into a major temple complex. The Kushites identified Jebel Barkal with the primordial mound of creation mythology. They believed the uraeus, royal cobra, on the forehead of Egyptian statues originated here. Most significantly, they saw themselves as protectors of this sacred site and, by extension, of Orthodox Egyptian religion itself. This religious conviction would become the ideological foundation for their claim to rule Egypt. King Pi, the devout conqueror. Around 760 BCE, a new ruler came to power in Nubia, King Pi, also known as Pianki. The surviving records, particularly his magnificent victory stela discovered at Jebel Barkal in 1862, paint a portrait of a ruler unique in ancient history, a conqueror motivated not by greed or ambition but by religious duty. Pi looked north around 740 BCE and saw an Egypt fragmented into competing fiefdoms. Libyan chiefs, the 22nd and 23rd dynasties, ruled the delta, while various local rulers controlled Middle and Upper Egypt. Thebes had its own priesthood largely independent of political authority. To Pi, this political chaos represented a profound spiritual crisis, a violation of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice. His response was unprecedented. Rather than launching a typical military campaign of plunder, Pi presented himself as Egypt's legitimate pharaoh, chosen by Ammonius to restore divine order. His campaign, meticulously recorded on the victory stela, reveals sophisticated strategy. Diplomacy first. Pi initially sought submission through negotiation, sending messengers demanding allegiance to his divinely sanctioned rule. Targeted warfare. When diplomacy failed, particularly with the Libyan chief Tefnakt of Sais, Pi employed overwhelming force but with remarkable restraint. After capturing cities, he often spared inhabitants who took refuge in temples, respecting their sanctuary. Religious theater. The campaign was framed as a religious procession. Pi's army included priests, and he made offerings at captured cities' temples, demonstrating his piety and legitimacy. Selective punishment. Rebel leaders were executed, but compliant local rulers were confirmed in their positions under Kushite overlordship. The campaign culminated in the siege of Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. After its fall, all remaining resistance collapsed. By approximately 728 BCE, Pi controlled a unified Egypt from Nubia to the Mediterranean, the first time Egypt had been united in decades. The revolutionary decision, rule from afar. Having achieved this unprecedented victory, Pi made a decision that puzzled contemporaries and continues to intrigue historians. He returned to Napata. Rather than establishing his court in Memphis or Thebes, he governed Egypt through trusted officials while maintaining his capital in Kush. This was neither retreat nor neglect. It was a calculated political innovation with multiple strategic advantages. Maintaining Kushite identity. By ruling from Napata, Pi ensured the Kushite heartland remained the dynasty's power base, preventing assimilation that had weakened previous foreign rulers of Egypt. Religious legitimacy. Residing near Jebel Barkal kept Pi close to the source of his divine authority, Ammonius of Napata. Egyptian priests would now travel south to consult oracles, reversing the traditional direction of religious authority. Balanced governance. Appointing capable administrators, often including family members, to govern Egypt allowed for local expertise while maintaining central control. Economic management. Kush could directly benefit from Egyptian wealth without the resentment that might come from a visible foreign court extracting resources. Pi's inscription on the victory stela concludes not with boasts of conquest but with descriptions of religious ceremonies and his return to Kush in peace and joy. He had created a new political model, a trans-Nile empire with dual capitals, legitimized by religious orthodoxy rather than mere military power. Architectural and artistic revival. Under Kushite patronage, Egypt experienced a cultural renaissance. Decades of political fragmentation had taken their toll on temple maintenance and artistic production. The Kushite pharaohs launched an ambitious program of restoration and construction. Temple restoration. At Karnak, Luxor, and other religious sites, neglected structures were repaired using traditional techniques. At Medinet Habu, the Kushites added to Ramesses III's temple. Most significantly, they built the Kushite portal at Karnak's 10th pylon, creating a ceremonial entrance celebrating their rule. Artistic innovation. Kushite period art displays what scholars call archaeism, a deliberate revival of Old and Middle Kingdom styles mixed with distinct Kushite elements. Statues of Kushite pharaohs show masterful Egyptian craftsmanship but with subtle African features. Fuller lips, broader noses, distinctive hairstyles, including the cap crown with double uraei, and more muscular physiques. These weren't errors or incompetence but conscious stylistic choices asserting a distinct identity within Egyptian conventions. The Nuri pyramids. In Kush itself, at the royal cemetery of Nuri, Pi and his successors constructed pyramids, the first built in the Nile Valley in over 500 years. These were not slavish copies of Egyptian models but distinctive adaptations. Steeper angles, approximately 70 degrees compared to Egypt's 50 to 52 degrees, smaller bases and underground burial chambers accessed via descending staircases. The pyramids represented a symbolic statement. The Kushites were reviving pharaonic traditions while adapting them to their own culture. Religious policy, orthodox innovation. The Kushite approach to religion was particularly sophisticated. As foreigners, they could have imposed Kushite beliefs or syncretic practices. Instead, they positioned themselves as defenders of Egyptian orthodoxy. Ammonius of Napata. The Kushites promoted the theology that the true Ammonius resided at Jebel Barkal, with Thebes being merely a northern manifestation. This cleverly positioned Kush as the spiritual heartland of the Egyptian pantheon. Oracle system. They developed an elaborate oracle system at Jebel Barkal where Ammonius' will was interpreted, often to validate royal decisions. Egyptian priests traveled south to consult these oracles, effectively acknowledging Kushite religious authority. Royal rituals. Kushite pharaohs meticulously performed all traditional Egyptian royal rituals. The Sed festival, Opet festival, temple foundation ceremonies, often with greater attention to detail than their Egyptian predecessors. Preservation efforts. Evidence suggests the Kushites commissioned copies of ancient religious texts that were decaying or being lost, serving as conservators of Egyptian religious literature. Administration and governance. The 25th dynasty established an efficient administrative system that balanced continuity with innovation. Dual capitals. Memphis served as the northern administrative capital, governed by Pi's brother, later his son, while Thebes remained the religious capital under the god's wife of Ammonius, a position held by Kushite princesses. Local autonomy. Many local rulers who submitted to Kushite authority were confirmed in their positions, creating a federated structure that maintained stability while ensuring loyalty. Military organization. The Kushite army combined traditional Nubian archery units, the legendary Medjay, with Egyptian-style chariot corps and infantry, creating one of the period's most effective fighting forces. Economic integration. Trade routes between Egypt and Kush were strengthened, with goods flowing both directions. Gold, ivory, and exotic African products north. Manufactured goods, luxury items, and agricultural products south. The gathering storm. Assyria's western expansion. While Kushite pharaohs Shabaka, c. 721 to 707 BCE, and Shabitku, c. 707 to 690 BCE, consolidated rule in Egypt, a greater threat was emerging in Mesopotamia. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, under aggressive rulers like Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II, Assyria had become the ancient world's first true empire, employing unprecedented military technology, iron weapons, siege engines, professional armies, and psychological warfare. By the late 8th century BCE, Assyria had conquered much of the Levant and was eyeing Egypt, the last remaining independent power in the region and a potential source of immense wealth. The clash between these two expansionist powers, Assyria from the east, Kushite Egypt from the south, was inevitable. Taharka, the pharaoh general. In approximately 690 BCE, Taharka ascended the throne. Ruling for 26 years, he would become the most celebrated Kushite pharaoh, a figure remembered in both Egyptian and biblical traditions. Taharka's early life is revealing. He came to Egypt as a young prince during Shabaka's reign, was educated in Egyptian and military arts, and participated in campaigns before becoming pharaoh. This made him uniquely prepared for the Assyrian challenge. Taharka's strategy was multifaceted and remarkably modern. Military reforms. He reorganized the Egyptian army, incorporating new technologies and tactics learned from Assyrian encounters while maintaining Kushite strengths in archery and mobile warfare. Intelligence network. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests Taharka established an extensive intelligence network throughout the Levant, monitoring Assyrian movements and coordinating with local resistance. Diplomatic alliances. He built what might be called history's first pan-Levantine alliance, coordinating with kingdoms from Philistia to Judah to Phoenician city-states against Assyria. Economic warfare. By controlling trade routes and supporting rebellions in Assyrian territories, Taharka aimed to strain Assyria's economy and overextend its military. The 701 BCE campaign, biblical echoes. The confrontation reached its first climax in 701 BCE when Assyrian king Sennacherib besieged Jerusalem, capital of the Kingdom of Judah. According to 2 Kings 19 verse 9 and Assyrian records, Taharka marched north with a substantial army, forcing Sennacherib to break the siege. The exact outcome remains debated. The biblical account speaks of divine intervention, an angel striking down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, while Assyrian records claim victory but notably abandoned the campaign. What's clear is that Sennacherib failed to capture Jerusalem, withdrew to Nineveh, and was later assassinated by his sons, 681 BCE. For Taharka, this was a strategic triumph that secured his reputation and preserved Judah as a buffer state for decades. The cultural zenith. With the immediate Assyrian threat temporarily neutralized, Taharka launched an unprecedented cultural and building program. Monumental construction. At Karnak, he built a monumental colonnaded court, still impressive today, sacred lakes, and chapels. His buildings appeared from the Delta to Kush, each carefully crafted in traditional styles but with Kushite artistic signatures. Economic expansion. Taharka expanded Egyptian trade deep into Africa, establishing direct contacts with regions south of Kush. African goods, ivory, ebony, exotic animals, gold, flowed north without intermediaries, enriching Egypt and strengthening Kushite economic independence. Literary renaissance. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from Taharka's reign are noted for their linguistic purity, reviving classical Middle Egyptian grammar and phrasing. Scholars suggest Kushite scribes may have systematically collected and preserved older texts that were decaying. Religious development. The theology of Ammonius reached new sophistication, with Kushite theologians developing complex interpretations that positioned their rule as divinely ordained restoration rather than foreign conquest. For 15 years, c. 690 to 675 BCE, Taharka's Egypt experienced prosperity and cultural flowering unmatched since the New Kingdom. The Kushite synthesis seemed secure, a successful model of bicultural empire. But the Assyrian threat had only been delayed, not defeated. Esarhaddon's campaign, a new kind of war. In 681 BCE, Esarhaddon stabilized the Assyrian throne after his father Sennacherib's assassination. Learning from previous failures, he prepared meticulously for an Egyptian invasion. Alliances with Egyptian elites. Esarhaddon cultivated relationships with Delta rulers who resented Kushite domination, particularly in Sais where the Libyan dynasty had been supplanted. Military innovations. Assyrian armies adapted to Egyptian conditions, developing lighter equipment for desert warfare and collaborating with Phoenician and Cypriot fleets for naval support. Psychological warfare. Assyrian propaganda portrayed the Kushites as foreign usurpers, contrasting with Assyria's claimed role as restorer of legitimate, i.e., Libyan, Egyptian rule. Multi-pronged strategy. Plans called for simultaneous attacks from the Levant and through desert routes, bypassing traditional defenses. The invasion of 671 BCE. The Assyrian invasion force was the largest yet deployed outside Mesopotamia. Esarhaddon personally led the campaign, recording his progress in boastful inscriptions. The Kushites fought skillfully. Taharka's forces won several engagements, but faced unprecedented challenges. Betrayal from within. Several Egyptian cities, particularly in the Delta, opened their gates to the Assyrians, whose propaganda had effectively exploited anti-Kushite sentiment. Technological disadvantage. Assyrian iron weapons and siege technology outperformed Kushite bronze equipment in prolonged engagements. Strategic overextension. Defending the entire Nile Valley stretched Kushite forces thin against concentrated Assyrian attacks. After fierce fighting, Memphis fell. Esarhaddon captured Taharka's family and treasury, though the pharaoh himself escaped south. The Assyrian king installed local collaborators as vassals and erected a victory stela showing Taharka's son in captivity. Taharka's counteroffensive and final withdrawal. What happened next demonstrates Taharka's strategic brilliance. He retreated to Thebes, regrouped, and within 2 years, 669 BCE counterattacked, expelling Assyrian garrisons and reclaiming Memphis. Esarhaddon died en route to respond. But Assyria returned under Esarhaddon's son Ashurbanipal with even greater force. In 667/666 BCE, a massive Assyrian army recaptured Memphis and marched south to Thebes. Facing overwhelming odds and recognizing that continued resistance would devastate Egypt's cities and temples, Taharka made his historic decision. Strategic withdrawal to Kush. The organized evacuation transfer of civilization. This was no panicked flight. Taharka orchestrated what might be called one of antiquity's most organized transfers of knowledge and culture. Personnel evacuation. Egyptian priests, scribes, artisans, and administrators who had served the Kushites were encouraged, and in key cases required, to relocate south. This wasn't forced migration but often voluntary. These elites had collaborated with Kushite rule and feared Assyrian reprisals. Cultural transportation. Temple archives, religious texts, technical manuals, and artistic models were systematically copied or transported. Archaeological evidence at Meroe, the later Kushite capital, shows Egyptian religious texts preserved centuries after they disappeared in Egypt itself. Continuity of institutions. Kushite administrative and religious structures were maintained, now centered in Kush rather than Egypt. Economic safeguarding. Wealth was moved south, and trade routes were redirected through Kushite-controlled territories beyond Assyrian reach. The Assyrians captured and Egypt stripped of much cultural capital. Ashurbanipal sacked Thebes in 664 BCE, a shock recorded in the biblical book of Nahum, but the intellectual and religious heart of Egyptian civilization had already moved south with the Kushites. The new capital, strategic innovation. While Napata remained the religious center, practical governance required a new administrative capital. Around 600 BCE, the Kushites established Meroe between the Atbara and Nile rivers, approximately 200 kilometers north of modern Khartoum. The location was strategically brilliant. Defensive position, further from Egyptian borders, protected by cataracts and deserts. Economic hub, at the intersection of Nile trade and overland routes from the Red Sea and Central Africa. Resource rich, nearby iron deposits and extensive agricultural potential. Climate, better rainfall than northern regions, reducing dependence on Nile floods. The Meroitic Industrial Revolution. Meroe became one of the ancient world's major industrial centers. Iron production. Archaeological excavations have revealed extensive iron smelting facilities, furnaces, slag heaps, workshops, operating on an industrial scale. While claims of an African industrial revolution may be overstated, Meroe was certainly a major iron producer, manufacturing tools, weapons, and trade goods. Textiles and pottery. Meroe produced fine textiles, mentioned in Roman sources, and distinctive pottery with polished black surfaces and painted decoration. Architectural innovation. Meroitic architecture blended Egyptian temple forms with local styles, using mud brick, sandstone, and wood. The city featured palaces, temples, reservoirs, and extensive residential quarters. Urban planning. Meroe displayed sophisticated urban planning with specialized districts for industry, administration, religion, and housing, more advanced than contemporary Egyptian cities. The Meroitic script, an African writing system. One of Kush's most significant achievements was developing its own writing system. Initially using Egyptian hieroglyphs, by the 3rd century BCE they created the Meroitic script, an alphabetic system with 23 signs. While not fully deciphered today, surviving inscriptions on temples, pyramids, and pottery show a literate society producing administrative documents, religious texts, and probably literature. The development of Meroitic represents a crucial assertion of cultural independence. The Kushites had mastered Egyptian writing, then created their own. This democratization of literacy, alphabetic systems are easier to learn than hieroglyphs, suggests broader administrative participation than in Egypt. The Kandakes, queens as sovereign rulers. Meroe produced one of the ancient world's most remarkable political institutions. Ruling queens, known by the title Kandake, rendered Candace in Greek sources. Unlike Egyptian queens who derived power from husbands or sons, Kandakes ruled in their own right as sovereign monarchs. The most famous, Amon-Irenas, c. 40 to 10 BCE, led Kushite armies against Roman Egypt after Augustus' conquest. According to Strabo, she defeated Roman forces at Aswan, sacked Philai, and destroyed statues of Augustus. After protracted conflict, she negotiated a favorable peace treaty with Rome that endured for centuries, a remarkable achievement against the Mediterranean's superpower. Other Kandakes like Amanishakheto and Amanitor left magnificent pyramids and temples. Their prominence suggests Meroe had a different gender dynamic than Egypt or the classical world, with women regularly exercising sovereign power. Religion in Meroe. Syncretism and innovation. Meroitic religion evolved into a sophisticated synthesis. Continued Egyptian elements. Ammonius remained important, with temples at Meroe and Naka following Egyptian plans, but with Meroitic adaptations. Indigenous deities. Local gods like Apidmak, lion-headed warrior god, gained prominence, depicted in distinctly Meroitic style. Royal cults. Dead rulers were worshipped, with mortuary temples serving as centers of ongoing royal cults. Syncretic imagery. Temple reliefs show fascinating blends. Apidmak with attributes of Egyptian gods. Meroitic queens in Egyptian crowns but African features. The Meroitic period c. 300 BCE 350 CE represents neither Egyptian imitation nor rejection but the mature development of a distinct civilization that had absorbed Egyptian, African, and later Hellenistic influences into something new. The end of Kushite independence. Multiple factors contributed to Meroe's gradual decline from the 3rd century CE. Environmental changes. Archaeological evidence suggests climate shift toward aridity, reducing agricultural productivity. Economic shifts. New trade routes bypassed Meroe, particularly after camels enabled trans-Saharan trade, and Aksum, Ethiopia, rose as a Red Sea power. Military pressures. Nomadic groups like the Blemis attacked from the desert, while Aksum grew increasingly powerful to the east. Cultural transformation. Christianity spread through Nubia from Egypt, challenging traditional religion, though Meroe itself remained pagan longer than Egyptian Nubia. Around 350 CE, Aksumite king Ezana recorded his invasion of Meroe, though whether this caused collapse or recorded a decline already underway is debated. The Meroitic state fragmented into smaller kingdoms, Nobatia, Makuria, Alodia, that later Christianized. The Great Forgetting, how history lost Kush. For nearly 1,500 years after its decline, Kush virtually disappeared from historical memory outside Sudan. This erasure resulted from multiple factors. Ancient prejudices. Classical writers like Herodotus mentioned Kush but often as an exotic periphery. Roman and later Byzantine sources focused on their own interactions, not Kushite history. Islamic period. Arab historians knew of Sudan's Christian kingdoms, but had limited knowledge of earlier pagan Kush. Colonial Egyptology. When European scholars began studying Egypt systematically in the 19th century, they brought racial assumptions that couldn't accommodate sophisticated black African civilization. Figures like Richard Lepsius acknowledged Kushite monuments but considered them derivative. Systemic bias. Early archaeology in Sudan was conducted by Egyptologists who saw Kush as peripheral to Egypt. George Reisner's pioneering work in the early 20th century was groundbreaking but interpreted through problematic racial frameworks that attributed achievements to Egyptianized elites rather than indigenous development. Rediscovery and reassessment. The modern reassessment of Kush began mid-20th century and accelerated from the 1960s. New archaeological approaches. Researchers like William Y. Adams, Charles Bonnet, and Timothy Kendall employed more systematic methods, treating Kush as a civilization in its own right rather than Egyptian derivative. Key discoveries. Bonnet's excavations at Kerma, 1970s onward, revealed the sophistication of pre-Egyptian Kush. Kendall's work at Jebel Barkal uncovered the complexity of Kushite religion. Underwater archaeology at Meroe revealed industrial scale. Decolonizing scholarship. African and African diaspora scholars like Cheikh Anta Diop, though controversial, challenged Eurocentric narratives, while mainstream archaeologists increasingly recognized Kushite achievements. Technological advances. Satellite imagery, LiDAR, and biochemical analysis have revealed Kush's true scale. Extensive agriculture, trade networks reaching Central Africa, and population size rivaling contemporary civilizations. Kush's African legacy. Though politically fragmented, Kush's influence permeated later African civilizations. Technological transmission. Ironworking technology spread from Meroe to West Africa, possibly influencing Nok culture and later West African states. Architectural traditions. The pyramid form, though abandoned in Egypt, continued in Sudan for centuries and may have influenced early Christian Nubian architecture. Political models. The concept of sacred kingship, divine rulers mediating between people and gods, appears in various forms across Africa, possibly with Kushite connections. Artistic styles. Distinctive Meroitic artistic conventions, certain spiral patterns, animal depictions, reappear in later African art from Ethiopia to the Sahel,